Hey everybody! Today we're going to be reading chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, and after I get done reading scripture, I'm going to explain what I think about it, how I feel about it. And I'm not an expert in scripture at all, so please do not lean on my understanding, but trust in the Lord for understanding and for guidance. And if I mispronounce any names, places, people, words, anything like that, I do apologize. And as always, I'm reading from my Bible. It is the New International Version, so the NIV version for those who want to follow along. And without further ado, let's get started. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders for thousands and commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai, the Gittite. The king told the troops, "I myself will surely march out with you." But the men said, "You must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city." The king answered, "I will do whatever seems best to you." So the king stood beside the gate while all his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. The king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake." And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in mid-air while the mule he was riding kept on going. When one of the men saw what had happened, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab said to the man who had told him this, "What, you saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have had to give you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." But the man replied, "Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have kept your distance from me." Joab said, "I'm not going to wait like this for you." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest, and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. During this time, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, "I have no son to carry on the memory of my name." He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. Now Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and take the news to the king that the Lord has vindicated him by delivering him from the hands of his enemies." "You are not the one to take the news today," Joab told him. "You may take the news another time, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead." Then Joab said to a Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed down before Joab and ran off. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, "Come what may, please let me run behind the Cushite." But Joab replied, "My son, why do you want to go? You don't have any news that would bring you a reward." He said, "Come what may, I want to run." So Joab said, "Run." Then Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain and outran the Cushite. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates, the watchman went up to the roof of the gateway by the wall. As he looked out, he saw a man running along. The watchman called out to the king and reported it. The king said, "If he is alone, he must have good news." And the runner came closer and closer. Then the watchman saw another runner, and he called down to the gatekeeper, "Look, another man running along." The king said, "He must be bringing good news too." The watchman said, "It seems to me that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "He's a good man," the king said. "He comes with good news." Then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." He bowed down before the king with his face to the ground and said, "Praise be to the Lord your God. He has delivered up those who lifted their hands against my lord the king." The king asked, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" Ahimaaz answered, "I saw great confusion just as Joab was about to send the king's servant and me, your servant, but I don't know what it was." The king said, "Stand aside and wait here." So he stepped aside and stood there. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Thus ends the reading of chapter 18 of 2 Samuel. So I love how like basically this part of David's life reminds me of how in spite of what people do to you, you still love them and you still want nothing for the best for them and you don't want anything bad to happen to them. And David, even though he knew that his son Absalom had his killed his other son because he had defiled his sister Tamar and stuff. Like, even though Absalom did that and stuff, and even though David I think David wasn't happy about that. I can't really remember. But even though Absalom did that, and even though Absalom was exiled and everything, he was, away from Israel. David still, brought him back, and And even though David didn't see him for a while, he still went, and saw, Absalom after a while. Of course, Absalom had to, have a woman deliver the message to David in order for David to come visit him and see him. But, you know, it's like, even though Absalom did all that, David still loved him because that's his son. And then even though Absalom, may cause David to flee and everything, Israel, because Absalom, took over Israel because he won all the hearts of the Israelite people, over to him. Um, David still loved them and stuff. Like even though David, got his throne back, got the throne of Israel back and everything. At least I think he did by this point. If not, I know he is soon. But even though David's gonna get his throne, gonna get the throne of Israel back, like he still loved his son. It's like Absalom is David's son, and no matter what Absalom does, he's still gonna love his son. You know, he's not gonna like the wicked things that he does, but he's still gonna love his son, regardless, and don't want anything bad to happen to him. And it reminds me of my situation. I love my family, in spite of, the things that they've done to me. I love my family, and I forgive them, and I'm healing from that and everything. And I'm trying my best to not let, what happened in the past and stuff prevent me from doing good, for them, today. you know so like I feel David in this moment. Like he grieving for his son. He just lost his son, you know, and he's sad, you know, about that, because that's his son. That's his child, you know. If something was to happen to my family or whatever, I would be sad. I would cry, shed tears and stuff, because that's my family, and I love them and everything. In spite of what they did to me, I love them still. I do have boundaries now and everything, and I'm not going to allow certain things to happen because I got to protect myself and my peace and stuff, and I got to do what's best for me, but at the end of the day, like I still love them, and if I can, I will help them, and I'll do good for them and be there for them. But if something was to happen to them, my family, I would be sad, because that's my family, literally. So yeah, I understand David. I understand David and why David mourning for his son. I really do understand. Now, I wonder what David gonna do to Joab, because Joab and his I know it was Joab who took the javelin and stabbed Absalom in the heart, but I can't remember whether or not other people. Yeah, Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. But Joab himself took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still, alive in the oak tree. So it's just, like I feel like David is gonna learn about who killed Absalom, his son, and I don't know what David's gonna do, but all I know is that if Joab was not supposed to kill Absalom, then he's gonna suffer some consequences for them actions. If he was supposed to, if the Lord approved and everything, then I guess Joab gonna be okay. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it's all about the Lord and whether or not He approves of stuff going down, stuff happening. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this chapter. Like David is over here trying his best in order to protect his son, and keep him from harm in spite of what his son has done. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I do for my family. I be praying for my family and everything, trying to make sure and stuff that they are okay, and that don't nothing happen to them. All I want is the best, what's best for my family, just like David want what's best for his family. Like, I want them to be prosperous. I want them to be successful. I don't want them to have to go through any financial struggles anymore, and I don't want them to have to, like I just want everybody to be financially stable, and I just want everybody to be in harmony and like love each other, and just do good for one another. Actually be a family and be supportive and stuff. You know, like that's all I want for my family. That's all. And I want them to know the Lord, obviously. I want them to have their own relationship with the Lord. And cause with Jesus, life is just so much better. It is. But when you have a relationship, relationships take work. It take work on both sides. It take work, from you and the other person. So when it comes down to a relationship with the Lord and everything, it take work from both you and him, to make the relationship work. And the Lord always doing his part. It's whether or not you gonna do your part. And I strive every day to do my part. But, I don't know if my family is willing to put in such work. They love having me around because they love the blessings and stuff like that come from me, being around. And they love the fact that they can get, blessings without having to, do any work themselves. But, if I were to leave one day, like, what are they gonna do? They can't just, benefit off of my faith anymore. They won't be able to benefit from my relationship with the Lord anymore. They won't be able to, get blessings from me, from the Lord because of me anymore. Like, that reminds me of how Jacob worked for Laman for 14 years for Rachel. And he got Rachel, and the whole entire time that Jacob hold on, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Yeah, the whole time that Jacob was working for Laman and stuff, Laman was being blessed because of Jacob, because the Lord was with Jacob, you know. But as soon as when Jacob left, them blessings, Laman wasn't getting blessed no more. Cause Laman was doing some cruel stuff to Jacob. Changing his wages 10 times and all the rest of this other stuff. Have the nerve to try and say that everything belongs to him and stuff when it don't. It all belonged to Jacob. Having the nerve to try and tell Jacob that his wives belong to him or whatever because that's his daughters. Like, no, when a woman marries a man, she leaves her family and becomes one with her husband. They no longer belong to you. Your daughters now belong to their husband. Like, and the children that come from that union don't belong to you. They belong to the parents. Like nothing that Jacob owned belonged to you. But Laman felt like he was entitled to everything. It was ridiculous. But yeah, like, I just want what's best for my family, and I know that David did too. David did too, but unfortunately, Absalom got killed. And in the next chapter, we gonna figure out what happened, what David gonna do, because we already know David, as soon as David find out that some injustices happen to his family members or whatever, he be on it. Let some injustice happen to him or his family or his friends or whatever, his men in the army or whatever. Let something happen to him. David be on it. So we finna see what happened. We finna see what happened. I don't know what David gonna do, but we'll see. But thank y'all so much for listening. I love you. Jesus loves you, and have a blessed day. Bye.